some really good dialogue over the course of this presentation. It's going to be quite informal. The program that I'm going to talk about is brand new. We have only been in operation with clients for about 6 months. It's been in the works since 2018. The program itself, when we're talking transition into the community, is the first time that we have in the nonprofit that I run ever worked with folks with eating disorders, and it's certainly a partnership. And I have to say, I'm very pleased that we are a clear partnership with mental health and addictions with the youth programs there. I do want to give kudos right from the beginning to Catherine Hay, who was on the board of the program where this model that we're using and we're going to talk about today originated. Catherine was on our board for a number of years, and when the idea came up for a program with folks living with eating disorders, Catherine came to us and said, "What do you think?" And I think my first reaction was, "You're out of your mind. We don't do things like this." And then we started to think about it. And today we're going to talk about why I think this model is going to work. We have only been with clients for the last 6 months, and so far so good. But I'm looking forward to the discussion on what you think about working in a transitional model and transition into the community in this way. So feel free, Andrew's going to monitor the chat if you have questions as we go along. I'm really looking forward to having that discussion and answering them. I know there's a number of students here today, and they're going to, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about eating disorders per se in terms of background in terms of the DSM-5. The reality is you're going to see me in class in November, so we're going to spend our time then talking about the phenomena of the individual that lives with eating disorders. So let's talk and let's move on. So the background I'm going to talk about today is why is this project. I'm going to give you a little input into what House Next Door looks like, because it's the model that we're using with Alberta Mental Health Services and the Eating Disorder Program. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the partnership and the actual proposal, and a little bit about what it looks like now. And as I say, because it's such a new program, this time next year we're going to have the data and the research, because we are researching it as we go along. Mental Health Services has really been really good at partnering with us, and we are doing research from day one with all of the residents that we are serving. So why? Well, I think it's a clear fact that eating disorder, there's a significant number of eating disorders in Edmonton and Northern Alberta. There are only 12 inpatient beds at the University of Alberta Hospital. The day hospital has between 45 and 50 outpatients. And there's really about 700 patients connected to the University of Alberta Hospital. At the point where we were approached to consider looking at working with the program to develop a step-down program, there was no step-down service. So in 2018, we began a proposal, we began a lot of discussions between mental health addictions and the House Next Door to develop a step-down community program that might change the prognosis and might change the outcomes for some of the patients. As you know, folks that live with eating disorders, it's a very intense process. They have multiple systems involved very often because of the eating disorder. And so it's an intense combination of the mental health and the medical kinds of experiences. And this step-down program seemed to be something that made common sense at the time. So why were we approached? As I say, Catherine had sat on our board for a number of years, so she was quite familiar with our model. The House Next Door itself is a nonprofit traditional housing project, and we've always dealt with hard to serve populations. By hard to serve populations, we deal primarily in forensics at this point, and I'm going to share with you some of the similarities in what we deal with. Interestingly enough, there are similarities in the two populations. And we serve hard to serve populations. Forensics, most of our clients, about 50% of our clients are on warrants when they come to us. And they have always had difficulty integrating into the community successfully. One of the key things about House Next Door is it's primarily based on an occupational therapy model. It was based originally on the PEO model. Why was the PEO model chosen? It was because it was easy to explain to our staff. We started with a single house. We knew that there was a relationship between function, occupation, and what was happening when people were not integrating successfully into the community. And so we used the PEO to not only train our staff, but work really hard to have the public we work with and the communities we work with to understand the relationship between the individual, their occupations, and where they fit into the community and the needs within the community. We've also been a funded project and have a relationship with mental health and addiction for many years. So we are a funded program. We do have costs involved for the clients that we serve, but we have the majority of our budget does come from mental health and addictions. And so the vision at mental health and addictions, and particularly in the youth programming, was to enhance community treatment capacity. And because our only place has always been in the community, we have developed a transitional model that has worked quite effectively for our population that we then began to think of in discussion about working with people with eating disorders that seem to translate in some odd way. And by odd way, I mean, one would never think these two populations have anything in common, but the skill sets and the occupations that they seem to have problems with were similar both within the forensic population, and then when we reviewed the literature and we talked to practitioners who were working intensely with folks with eating disorders, the skill sets that we're trying to build in the way we were building them in House Next Door seemed to make sense. So we did form a partnership. As I said, it started in 2018. We were looking at some specialty grants and we put forward and we were funded. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our program because it is the program that's the basis now for the eating disorder program. We've been around a long time. We've been a registered housing charity since 1970. We only do transitional housing and connecting people to community care services. So we have never built our own services, for example, employment. We have had examples of that over the years where we do some partnerships with different agencies, but primarily we are there to help people learn core basic skills within a safe environment. And by safe environment is we were finding early on that if we sent our forensic clients back to their home communities, and what Alberta Hospital was finding at that time is that their failure rate and the recidivism rate was very high. They needed a place that was different from going home where the stressors in the environment hadn't changed very much. And so we came in with this transitional program where people come to a home-like environment, they live, they learn their skills, we start them wherever they are, and they then potentially graduate to be more independent, but still connected with our program. So we have individuals that have been connected with our program for well over 20 years. They may live independently in the community, but when they start to decompensate, they come home. And that's been one of the claims of fame that we've had, is that we've been with the forensic population quite successful because there's never a point you can't come home. And so all of our programs deal with only the severe and persistent psychiatric illness. We have staff facilities, and we are all located in what we call non-central communities. Before we brought on this 5th program, we have 4 major programs. They're staffed 24/7. Our staffing is a variety of people that come from a variety of professions. We don't seek out single professions such as nursing. We have as I say, we've always had OTs on our board to make sure it has an occupational focus. But with any community program, we don't have a lot of paid professional staff. By that, I mean designated professional staff, although we do get people who work across professions that come and work for us. We are We buy duplexes in the city, so we have 4 main duplexes that are staffed 24/7. We also have what we call 24 satellite housing beds, which mean that we've also purchased around our main residences other houses and other accommodations, so that people that are not ready to move independently or go back home with their families can live in the vicinity of our main program houses so that we can support their journeys in life. With buying duplexes, we have 8 to 10 beds per program. The eating disorders program is a little bit different. We have 6 beds in that one. So we now have 5 houses that are staffed 24/7. And then satellite beds, which are not staffed, the rest of which are not staffed. Our staff goes and checks on clients there, or clients come to us. So what are the values that we hold that we've now translated into this 5th program? One, it's anonymity in recovery. You'll notice I do not show any pictures. I have one presentation that I've done a couple of times for other agencies, that we do actually show a picture of an outside of one of our houses. But one of the things that we believe in is that all of our clients should fit into the community that they're in. We are, with the number of people that we have in our facilities, we have not required many many specialized licenses. We are a licensed facility, but our neighbors understand that we have people who require a little extra help. We work hard with our neighbors, but we never give out an address of any one of our homes. And I think that allows people to really feel like they've come home when they're in our programs. We do have informed individual choices regarding program participation and community involvement. And we do it at a variety of levels. We find that in forensics, and I think we're starting to see some similar patterns with folks with eating disorders, that people are starting much lower than what their development, they're starting at a developmental level with their occupational skills that may be much lower than we think it should be, or that the community thinks it should be. So we start where the individual's at. We build individual programs. There is no single program that we offer across the board. So we also ensure that our clients do have choices and make informed choices about what they're going to do at any point. We do believe that we need to develop basic skills, and that every individual that comes into our program is different, and that their life and their values and their life experiences will all be different. So we want to develop individual programs as we go through. And so although we base it on life skills, and we can accommodate and we look at what those life skills are based on a number of assessment tools, where somebody starts can be very different. How we do it can be very different. And our staff are trained to look through that lens at any given point. So we do have a continuum of care, and we want to support optimum health, safety, and sustainable community living. And I think that is really one of the biggest things that we think about. How do we sustain people in the community? And that's where step-down programs have come in handy. And that's where our program has made its mark, in that we are a step-down community. People come out of acute care or hospital environments where they've had a lot of structure and support, or they're coming out of outpatient programs. They've struggled within those programs. They come to us, and we are in the community, and the pressures are different. And in many cases, they will describe, and our clients describe, that they feel like they have the opportunity to learn. And one of the clients said to me not long ago, I have the opportunity to learn without embarrassment. So recognizing that the lower level of skills, because of the illnesses that we see, can often need to be accommodated for. So our vision has always been successful community participation. And our mission statement has always been enables people with mental illness in the recovery by developing skills for healthy living within safe, supported housing options. And so as we develop the program for eating disorders, we're beginning to look at it in the same way, that we will have progressive housing options down the road for it, as we do with all of our other programs. So I'm just going to show you this quick map, just to let you know that this is the same intake process that we're using right across all of our programs, including this new program. And it seems to be the effective way to look at somebody. And so they intake, they come and visit. I'm sorry, I went too fast for that one, but they intake, they come and visit us. They have an opportunity to see what the program's about. They have an opportunity to come and share a few meals. We do some initial assessments. In this case, with our program with eating disorders, where they're obviously bringing skilled staff that they've worked with in the University of Alberta Hospital or the outpatient programs, and they help with that transition into residential living with us. Our transitional housing model looks at an intake of between 12 and 18 months. We used to say we were there for about 6 months, and what we found with forensics, and I suspect we're going to see the same, and we're already beginning to see the pattern when we look at some of the data, is that people just cannot make that transition into independence within a 6-month period. So we are looking more realistically that people will be in any of our main housing programs between 12 and 18 months. So there's no pressure. We don't put a timeline on it. You must leave within a certain, and I think that's part of why the program stays successful. We have goal-based individual programs. It's always client-centered, and as I say, it's one of the few that I look at when we look at the literature and we look across even Canada, that is truly occupational based. And I'm very proud of that. That started with the roots and we've maintained those roots. We do look at assessment of functioning across 17 indices of self-care and productivity. And we want demonstrated capacity, and we do match to long-term housing models in our main programs. And I suspect we'll be looking at that. But because we've only been in operation really for 6 months with our eating disorder clients, we're assuming that we will look at a similar model at that point, but there may be a more potential to be more independent. We're not sure at this point. And so I think if we had this same discussion a year from now, you'll see a different profile of what we know. COVID was not kind for opening programs. So who fits? Anybody but we do have some criteria. People have to be able to live together. They have to be able to engage with each other within the housing model. Part of it is learning how to have different kinds of relationships. And so we do emphasize community engagement. We emphasize recreation, appropriate recreation, appropriate exercise programs, cooking programs, craft programs, appropriate outings that very much are an engagement. So we learn social skills, we learn how to interact in a different kind of way. We want to have an intradependent community because people need at all levels of their life to be able to understand how to engage and what that form of engagement should look like. And so we also have to look at, are there active concurrent disorders with all of our population? It seems to be in forensics, and now we're looking at the eating disorders. There's often concurrent disorders that are going on, which leads to significant behavioral issues, as you're well aware. And for those of you that work in eating disorders and have been doing it for a lot longer than we have, there are some significant behavioral issues that go along with the condition and with the implementation of a recovery model. We also have to meet all the medical needs, and where I think it's going to be different is the cognitive abilities of some of our forensic clients, because of the addictions that they've had, may be a little lower than what we're going to see in the eating disorder population. But the reality is we are working on this intra-dependent community. We think that that is a really important thing, that people learn relational behavior, that they learn how to interact and change their relationships with people with activities, with their occupations. So we offer, one of the things that we do a lot of in our main program, which we're going to translate into the program for folks with eating disorders, is we want a vibrant, meaningful community living experience. So we do spend a lot of time on recreation and introducing recreation and activities to our client base. We do it in a way that we have our clients work together. So they learn about the problem-solving skills. They learn about how to plan, how to organize their time. They learn about budgeting. We live in a time where recreation can be cost-effective or very expensive. So we do a lot of planning with our clients so they do outings. And it's done house specifically. So that there are some main recreation programs, but for the most part, it's within the house. So they start with small groups of people, and they learn to work within that group, and then they expand into some of the larger community areas that we have. So it is about cooperative planning. We do try and give people accessible, affordable recreation and leisure options. We think this is, as people are beginning to heal, as people are beginning to interact in different ways, they have to be able to afford it, and they have to be recognize that there are many things that they can do that are alternatives. And particularly when you're dealing, as we're looking around with some of our clients with eating disorders and the kinds of recreational things they did in terms of negativity about their eating disorder and how it impacted their eating disorder. We're trying to shift their leisure options. We're trying to give them different viewpoints of what they can be successful at, and certainly what kinds of activities are healthier for them at any given moment. And the other thing is that we, as I said at the very beginning, there is never an end point for our program. And I think that has been, and that will be implemented, it is being implemented already into the eating disorder program. In forensics, we found that we have never had, in all the years we've been working in the area, an incident in the city. It's been quite an amazing journey for us. There has never been an incident where we have had difficulties with a client. And that's because the open door policy, and that we are really careful as we move people on into appropriate other housing, that they've got the skill base to be able to do it. The other thing is that they can always come back, and they always can do the recreation if they're living independently, or the leisure activities, or the cooking, or the budgeting skills. They can always come back at any point in the journey. So they don't need to be living in the main part of the house, one of our main house programs. They can be out in the community in either a placement that we have found them, or in something they found for themselves, and they can still come back and participate at any given point. These are unbudgeted programs, and I have to say that they are what we call our non-funded. We're trying to work funding into most of it now, because it is something that we do on a regular basis. As we were moving into that, we're going to also, across our programs, and as I say, the outreach program for folks with eating disorders will be similar to what we've been doing in our other programs. We have community support services based on the needs. It means that somebody can always be followed into the community. And so we do have outreach workers that we have hired for our main, that are not associated with our main program. They come and go, and they're based in the main program houses. But what they do is they follow the clients into the community. So they go visit, they meet at coffee shops. With COVID, that's been an interesting evolution of where we don't meet now. But the reality is, if somebody needs that kind of connection on an ongoing basis in the community, and when we look at the literature around eating disorders, we think this is going to be a very important part of what we continue to do on an ongoing basis. And so it's always flexible, and it depends on the individual, and it depends on what they need at any given point. And so the support is very flexible. You need to be there daily. We have some clients, and we're going to see this across the board, that need support with medication on a daily basis. We do that. We have others that just need support in recreational activities and leisure, so they're learning and continuing with appropriate, flexible kinds of activities. So we continue to do that. So it really is dependent on the individual and what they need at any given point. The other thing I want to say is that we do have a lot of, and we see this will happen with the folks that are in our eating disorder program as well. We have semi-supported long-term housing options. So we have a lot of other leases. We own a number of other properties and that are not staffed 24 hours. We keep our rents lower than most rents. And the reason for that is we really believe that people have to have money for recreation. They have to have money for training or education, or so they can volunteer. And so we really do encourage people at any point to live in cost-effective ways. We also pair, and this is going to, as we start to look at the clients in our eating disorder program, we pair people for long-term accommodation. In other words, we want them to be able to, they might go out with somebody they've met in our program. If it's an appropriate pairing, rent an apartment together, and then our staff will support that transition. So we do a whole wraparound service. Even though it's a step down from hospital, it's still a wraparound service that we are providing. So it has always been called transitional housing because it's a really, we tend to discharge, and before we developed this model that we use well. Transitional housing is that we really need to figure out how we step people down from acute care into independence. And so the transitional part is really trying to figure out what that long-term stable housing market will be. If people feel safe in their own environments, and if they're in that environment at the point that they're ready for it, then they tend to be able to be more independent. They also tend to make better decisions, and they tend to develop the occupations that they need on an ongoing basis. And so part of our whole program, and as I say, it provides, now we have the 5 main houses. It will be about having lots of access to long-term housing choices across the board. It is about uninterrupted continuum of care. We, as I said earlier, and I will say it again, no one is ever discharged from our program. They may move on, they may move forward, they may live more independently or totally independently, but they get to come back at any point they need additional service, and that's at a no cost. So each one of the houses in the 5th house for our eating disorder program will also have what we call an emergency bed, where if somebody starts to struggle in the community and they're recognizing they're starting to struggle, they can come back into the main house because we want them to keep whatever housing option or living option they have in the community. And with folks that live with long-term mental health issues, very often, if they have to come to treatment again, they lose that other option. And we want to make sure that never occurs. So all of the houses, including our program with eating disorders, will have that long-term bridging and that emergency bed. And so it's a very intentional community. We want them to also foster, and we bridge with community resources. We want people to engage in what is regular community resources, not professional supports all the time. So we move them into programs that are directly related in the community. And as I say, interdependence enhances resilience. So what does this mean? It means that we are certainly a recovery-oriented focus across our programs. And we are focused on daily living skills. We recognize that recovery is personal, and that's something that we are now applying the new program, which I'm going to talk about in another moment. And it requires a measure of agency. So we look at what is the agency of the individual, what is their self-agency, what do they need, where are they at in their recovery, what do we do in any given moment to help that recovery continue. And that's always been based, and I think that's what, this is an OT audience, but the reality is it's always been based on an OT philosophy of recovery, and the recovery model is key. If you're going to have long-term sustainable results. We recognize that their social inclusion is really important, and that we have to have an ability to feel comfortable, and we have to be able to feel that we are participating in an equitable way across, in an effective way across our world. And so we really work on that value of social inclusion. We look for social networks where the individual fits. That doesn't mean, and we build social capital because we think that that's a way of facilitating recovery. So we want to ensure that we meet those individual needs. What is that person? What's the new interest? How do we sustain that new interest? Can we introduce them to different ways of handling things that they've had difficulties with? And then how do we do that within the context of the community? And we bridge that gap with all of the clients. So how does that fit with eating disorders? It was very strange when Catherine, as I say, Hay came and said, are you interested? One of the things that we did, or that I did, and a number of my board members did, and the majority of my board for House Next Door are occupational therapists. I need to tell you that. That's been strategic. We want that functional bend on anything we do. And one of the things we looked at is that individuals with eating disorders really are struggling with similar issues to our forensic clients. And that makes no sense from a logical point of view. We know that they are very different individuals. We know that those illnesses are very different. There's certainly a lot more medical issues around people living with eating disorders than there are forensics or hard to serve populations. But it was really interesting that the reason our model of transition fits so well is that there are similar issues between all of these groups. And so one of the things with eating disorders is that you look at that low self-esteem and emotional disorders linked to the demands of adult roles, occupations of daily living, and relationships. And when you look at these references, they're pretty clearly based in eating disorders, but you can also translate them into the literature on forensics. And the clients that we deal with all have low self-esteem. They have emotional disorders linked to the demands of adult roles. They very often don't have the developmental skill basis of somebody of their chronological age because of when their illnesses start to develop and the compensatory things they do because of the illnesses. And so the occupations of daily living and relationships got impacted, and that was in both groups. So all of a sudden we're starting to think this transition might work. This same need to move people through in a safe environment that's less demanding, that starts them wherever they're at, that is very individualized, and takes them out of the stressors. And that's not to say they don't have loving families right across the board. It's not to say they don't have supports external to us. It's just saying that our environment creates this sense of safety and this safety net because the demands are less. And so you can practice and learn new occupations. And we know that with eating disorders, occupations become focused on weight reduction or weight gain avoidance. But those daily occupations that very often they need to learn or do are similar across both groups. And so in the eating disorder group, we looked at, and what the literature is telling us and what the experiences that some of us have had in the program are telling us is that the maladaptive eating and lifestyle are really often related to the same things. And interestingly enough, again, in our forensic population, the limited stress management skills, the limited psychological, social, and life skills that they had. And so when these illnesses start to develop, regardless of what type it is, it seems to be those are core features of what we really need to do to support people to transition into independence. And so some of this, so our staffing, for example, can go, although we have staff dedicated to each house, our staff also, the house next door staff, and I'm going to talk about the professional staff we've added into the eating disorder program, but our staff moves across the houses because they are dealing all the time with individualized programs of stress management, life skills, social skills, and it affects, although folks with eating disorders deal with it in different ways around maladaptive eating, the core basic skills that they need are often very similar. And I hope I'm not, I'm hoping that that's resonating with some of you, because I think it is one of those kind of aha moments we had, that if we were going to take on another program that was so, what we looked at as almost an outlier, because we don't deal specifically with eating disorders, we had to look at what was the commonalities so that we could be effective. And we began to look at it as there are commonalities, although some of the professional has to be very different, and that's where we're going to be in a minute. We do know that with the eating disorders, there is something a little different though. They are often fragile, anxious personalities. There's often insecure attachments, although again, with our forensic clients, that's often there as well. There's also separation, individualization problems, and there are interactions, sorry for the typo, across family systems that are a little different. And again, we looked at the vulnerability, and our forensic clients that we deal with, not all of the clients in mental health, but the particular groups we've dealt with for so long have these exact same issues. And so the programs, as we start to think about how do we individualize stress management, what do we do? How do we individualize life skills? What have we been doing? The same programs work across the board in some ways. So what we do is we look at environment, we look at the impaired volition, difficulty coping with emotions, difficulty in participation of everyday activities, and communication is often impaired. And so those are the same kind of strategies, those are the same kind of skill building that we're doing across the programs. So it was really interesting. We had what we called our instant musing. When we met as a board, we met separate from, we worked with Catherine Hay and her team. We met as a board, but we realized that they were different origins. The illnesses were quite different when you looked at them, but the issues based on a global scale that we had developed our model on, that we developed our housing model, our skill building model, our communication models on, had all that we had developed for forensics actually did apply really well to the eating disorders. The core skills are similar, but we needed a low stress environment. And that seemed to be one of the things that with the new program and our other programs is that we had to ensure that we had a lower stress environment where the demands were where the person was able to cope with in the moment. And so we keep the pressures very low. We have expectations, but those expectations are adjusted for each person in the moment. And so once they've come through the hospital program, they have much more of an opportunity to apply some of the skills they were beginning to learn, but the environmental stressors are less. And clients have told us this for a number of years, and we're going to be interested to see if this happens in our newest program. But they seem to find that if you can reduce the stress and put them in an environment where familiar pressures, they're not going home to familiar pressures, they're coming into an environment with a lower stress without familiar pressures, they seem to be more willing to practice the new skills and the occupational skills that they're learning. And that seems to be a huge connection across our programs, but more importantly, that we're trying to incorporate into this newest. So we asked, should we or shouldn't we? And of course, it was just, of course we were. So the vision for House 5, which is, as I say, we've been operating for, with clients for about 6 months. We were a slow start. We didn't fill the house, the 6 beds. It's a 6-bed house versus our 8 to 10 beds in our other programs. We did not fill them right away. COVID happened, and so it's been a very gradual uptake. And so we don't have the data. As I say, a year from now, we'll have some great data on how it's working, what's happening, what's going on in the program. But we are the provider agency, but we've got enhanced specialty supports. One of our forensic houses has these similar supports, I will say that, but community services has really been wonderful at providing. We wanted to teach independent living skills for recovery with an OT presence. So we have an occupational therapist, which is just wonderful. We also have a dietitian associated with House 5, and we have a part-time psychiatrist. So we wanted to provide step down through stable and similar and familiar supports. So the house itself has 2 kitchens. Hopefully at some point we'll get brave and show some pictures. It's a beautiful house. It's in a different part of town from where we have the majority of our homes. It was, just to tell you a little bit about the luck of purchase when you're buying and when the market's down a little. It was a family who had immigrated to this country. They wanted to live together, and now they're selling the house, but they had 2 complete kitchens. The basement windows are amazing. It's not like living in a basement. It's like living on a main floor of a house. It has separate recreation areas. We have independent bedrooms and bathrooms. We needed to be close to public transportation. Many of the clients in our eating disorder program will go to programs at the hospital, at least at the beginning. We didn't need it to be in a community. There was lots of recreational and community resources, and it has to look, as all of our houses, like it's a house. We will not institutionalize our clients within a community. They have to feel that this is their home, and that's why they come back when they start to struggle. So it is 6 beds plus an emergency capability. We recognize these clients are medically complex, so there is nursing involved as well at times. They often have comorbidities. Our professional staff, as I just said, is a dietitian, occupational therapist, consulting psychiatrist. There is some nursing supports. And we have not yet had a year of operation, so we don't have any of the research data yet. So this is where the 2 skill sets come in. The house next door staff, who understands transition, with our AHS professional staff who are offering the program. We have house staff there 24 hours a day. They all have different skill sets. So for house next door, we hire, we have addiction counselors, we have life skill coaches, we have occasionally nursing, we have social workers, depends what we need, who we've hired from at any given moment. And they can go, our staff, between houses, although we try and dedicate, and with this program we're trying to, because of COVID, to dedicate all of our staff to stay specifically to this site. And there's ongoing research. So we started research from the day we opened this program to look at what is the most effective thing? Is that transitional model going to work? How is the what are the skills that we're building, and are they sustainable in each of the clients? What are the core programs that are going to be more effective in terms of recreation, in terms of occupations? And the best I can say is stay tuned. The reality is we don't know what our outcomes are going to be. We suspect, and we're hoping, the staffing from the AHS staff with our staff are working very hard to work together. They formed a strong bonded team. The clients are very much working towards control of their own lives. But outcomes, we still don't have them. And I would love to say, I can tell you it's going to be successful. We've been extremely successful in the forensic side. I anticipate we're going to see the same thing in this program, because of the commitment of all the folks to make this happen. And because it is transition, it allows people, again, and I can't reinforce it enough, that safe environment that's low stress to practice skills, that they're coming out of an acute experience, that they get to practice, but they also have support 24 hours a day. if they start to decompensate at any point. So I really want to thank the clients and the staff at all of our sites, but I do want to put a particular kudo out, and I wish she's away this week, to Catherine Hay. She's the program manager for young adult inpatient services at Alberta Health Services. And for those of you that have known her for a long time, she is the OT of OTs in my world, and really is committed to ensuring that these kind of programs exist in an effective way. So I'm more than open to questions, observations, your ideas. At this point, some of you maybe have perhaps worked with with folks that are living with eating disorders longer than we have, and I'd love to hear your ideas. So, Andrew, over to you.
I see we have one comment from Yesham. Liz, it sounds like there's an emphasis on attunement in the way the program is organized, in the way that clients with eating disorders are supported.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think we have to be very conscious of that level of support, and what do they need as an individual to ensure their success. There's too much, when you look at folks that are living with eating disorders, and for those that work every day in the field, the mortality rate's too high. We know that the outcomes are although we put so many wonderful resources in, the outcomes have not been that successful, which is why we were funded to try something different. And so I think it's the opportunity in transition and in these kind of programs that are step down programs, to give that extra layer of support. Can we get a copy? Are you intending on measuring the outcomes? Absolutely. We've had research involved from the planning stage, independent research through Alberta Mental Health and Addictions. We've had their research branch working with us from day one. So a year from now, we'll be able to start to look at what those measurable outcomes are. Absolutely critical. Step down programs like ours, and I have to say, we're cost effective, but we're not that cost effective in this particular population and in some of our forensic population, because we have to protect them. We have to protect the public in the other case. So we have to know our outcomes are good. And that's, I can look at our other data we have for our other programs. The data looks really good. The success rate, the long-term outcomes, the long-term skills, and they're comparable. We're hoping to see that same thing and start to emerge in the next year. And so happy to share it when we have it. Absolutely. And so happy to share the presentation at any point.
And I have another question here as well. Is the program open to external referrals? At
this point, not. Our other programs have been, and we would perceive that down the road. At this point, it's direct referral out of Alberta University of Alberta Hospital, just because of the fact there's only 6 beds, and as we're working towards figuring out this transition, we're taking the patients that are coming out of their inpatient or outpatient program.
Okay. Are the individuals who use substances, licit versus illicit versus weight management, are they able to participate in the program as well?
That's an interesting question. Technically, illicit substances we don't have on premise. We haven't ever. Do we see it? Absolutely. Do we want to discourage people from coming to the program? No. So it's one of those catch-21 vague answers that I'm going to give you.
All right, and we have one here from Gayla. Since the program is so new, what do you predict will be your biggest asset or barriers to sustainability?
Program, what is the biggest? Oh, I'm going to be really blunt here. Money. We're living in a very turbulent time. I think sustainability, I think once we get the outcomes, once we see the data, I suspect that hopefully science will play a role in sustainability. One of the things I would like to see, and maybe this is in response something to your thinking, Gayla, is that I would really like to see students with placements here. I think that we need to educate other professionals to work with individuals that are struggling with these disorders. It's certainly new for us, and it's we're all in the learning phase, and I think we need to be learning together and translating that learning, so that, because the incidence of folks that are living with eating disorders is far too high.
And I have a question here. What type of eating disorder specific education do the staff receive?
They've been working hand in hand with the unit. Our staff, our host staff, actually spent time on the unit at the University of Alberta Hospital. The professional staff has been hired through AHS specifically for that program. So they've worked with eating disorders in the past. And the education will continue between mental health and addictions youth services and our host and staff. They're taking courses as they go along. Again, for us, it was a new program, new concept. So the program at the University Hospital embraced our staff, and actually they spent time shadowing and doing all sorts of things.
Okay, we have an interesting question here from Janora Cupris. It is interesting that it's still called transitional housing, but the program doesn't discharge, and there is that continuous community commitment. Can you say more about why you see this as an important piece of the program, and how many clients you actually serve as a result of never discharging?
That's a great question. It's interesting. A lot of clients move on because when you don't discharge, it's just you're saying you've always got a home base. And by home base, I mean a place to come when you need to debrief, when you need to, when you're starting to feel life isn't going so well. You can come and have a cup of coffee and no one's going to judge. They're just going to say, come on in. We have at any point several hundred people on our rosters, and I would predict this will happen with this program as well. Do they use this frequently? No. Some people come. We had a client in one of our other programs. We hadn't seen the client in 8 years. They came because they were struggling, and it took a cup of coffee, a couple of visits, debriefing with the staff, connection with another agency, which our staff did quite willingly, and we may not see them for another 8 years. So by not discharging, it just means you always have a place to come. Do clients use it all the time? No. Do they use it frequently? No. But can they? Yes. And that provides, I think, a psychological safety net that many programs you have to become ill again, you go back into the system again. This way, you've got a system that just says, when things start to happen to you, come home, we'll talk, we'll think, we'll help you out a little bit. This is home. And it's why we never changed the name of the program. House Next Door, it was an old mass that we took over. And it was next door to it at that point a church, and it just felt like home. And we've always tried to create, and I think that's been one of the why we've been successful with other clients, and hopefully with this same group, is that you've always got a home base when you don't feel well, or you've always got a home base if you want to share something. It doesn't mean you come permanently back. It doesn't mean you move back in. For a few clients, we do every year. Our emergency beds in our other programs, they're often full, but it could be with somebody we haven't seen in 5 years. It could be with somebody who lives next door in an apartment, and they're struggling, and they need more supervision on a temporary basis, or they need more support on a temporary basis. So I think it's an advantage to say, we haven't discharged you, you can come home. But the coming home is left at the discretion of the client who is trying to live their life independently. Anything else? Does
So of
that
course,
answer your question more importantly?
we'll see if she comments, but of course we have more questions for you. Have you ever had a client who never wants to leave the house? And if so, how have you handled that? And this is from someone that stated anonymous.
Okay. Have we ever had a client who ever leave? All of our clients eventually leave. Um, Depending on the level of their ability to live independently, as I say, we also own a number of other satellite houses. So those houses have no time limit on it. So if somebody, but you are independent if you're living in one of those houses. You have your own space, you can do your own cooking. It's just that safety net of low income rent. And you can drop in, you're close in our neighborhood, that if you want to do a recreation activity with the house, you can do it. But do clients stay forever? No. Do they move on? That's our goal. It's no question that's our goal. And does anybody ever not want to leave? No, I think everybody comes in with I want my independence. It's for us to support them in figuring out what that looks like down the road. And it's going to be different for every client. And so it should be. There's no one, in all the years I've been doing this and with this, our newest program, I don't suspect we will never have a one-stop shop where we say everybody looks the same. Our whole goal is to meet them wherever they are and move them on however we can.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, maybe two. So I have one from Lauren Jennings. Apologies if this was already answered, but what is the criteria for the clients to be referred to the transitional housing?
For our, as I say, for House 5, which is our eating disorder program, they're coming right now out of the unit at the University of Alberta Hospital, or the outpatient some may come out of the outpatient program because it's been designated to that. For other programs, we do take community referrals. And hopefully someday once we get this up and running, we'll be able to do the same. And the community referrals can come through physicians, they come through social workers, or through the acute care hospitals. So the other parts of our program have become quite flexible. They started with the forensic units only. They're now flexible across the system, and we do get community referrals. House 5, eating disorders, is quite specific at this point, and 3 years, 5 years down the road, that may change.
All right, do you have time for one more question, Liz?
Absolutely. I'm laughing because I told Andrew my granddaughter got kicked out of daycare today. She's 16 months. She's teething because she had a runny nose. I have a 16-month-old and she's cooperating and sleeping beautifully. So yes, of course.
Okay, so we have, so this one's from Janora as well. Also wondering which staff are AHS and which are house next door. Can you clarify, does each bedroom have its own bathroom?
Depends which house, but the House 5, we have multiple bathrooms, and so everybody's got their own bathroom right now. Our AHS staff in the eating disorder program are the occupational therapist, the dietitian, the consulting psychiatrist. The rest are our staff at House Next Door.
All right, well, that's the last one. Thank you, Liz, so much. This has been so fantastic.
Oh, thank you. I'm just so happy to have shared. I think this is exciting. And as I say, a year from now, we should have some really interesting data to support what's happening and what's going on. And I look forward to sharing that research.
Then we will be expecting to hear from you again. All right, everyone, that's a wrap for today. Thank you so much for joining in on the conference, and we will see you again next year. Take care, everyone, and bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.